come unto me, those who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. It's a story that has to be told, and it needs to be told. It's time for it to be told. And I had just kept it not a secret. I mean, people knew I did it, but nobody, it wasn't a big deal. Well, it was, but no one wanted to talk about it. My mother hated her brother so bad, and they got in a big argument one time, and she went and bought all of the remaining grave spaces, 262 grave spaces, so he and his family couldn't be buried with the rest of the family. My grandmother, my grandfather, and aunts and uncles died, and they were buried there, and my daddy's buried there, but, we would go every Sunday and look at it and, arrange flowers, and she would say, all this is going to be yours someday, and I always wondered what I was going to do with a cemetery. I was at the hospital with a friend who had cancer, and she was having reconstructive surgery, and we noticed that the nurses were drawing straws to see who would go in and check on a patient. And so I knew, just from listening to him, I suspected what he had. And so I snuck into his room, and he wanted his mother. He was very near death, you could tell. And I went out and announced that, he wanted his mother, and they said, honey, his mama's not coming. He's been here 6 weeks. Nobody's coming. And so I, to make a long story short, stayed with him for 13 hours while he drew his last breath, and I took him, I had him cremated, and I took him to my family cemetery and buried him. I know that I've buried about 42 or 43. My daughter says I've buried more, but I've had a stroke, so I can't really remember. And then there were a lot of times that, someone's companion or just friend said, hey, we've got so-and-so's ashes here, and his parents don't want him, and he can't be buried, anyplace else. And I told them certainly they could, go out and pick out a spot and bury him. So I really don't know how many people are buried in the cemetery. I did have one drag queen whose mother called the night before the funeral and asked if she could come. And I said, well, yeah, I'm not going to tell you no, but I can't guarantee how people will treat you. Her son was in the hospital in Little Rock, and I went around the bed, and his arms and legs were so swollen from, his kidneys shutting down. And I said, Misty, it's Ruth. And he opened his eyes, and his friends jumped back, and he started crying, but he didn't have any tears because, the edema, all of his tears were in his arms and legs. And he started crying, and I took his arms and lifted him up and put them around my neck. And he needed to be suctioned, and he was choking to death. And so I went out and asked the nurses, and they said, no, we're not going to suction him. He has AIDS. And I go, well, it doesn't matter. And they go, well, we're not going to suction him. And I wasn't going to let him choke to death, so I said, if you'll just get a suction kit and leave it someplace, I will see that he gets suctioned. And before I did, he was gurgling, and it was just awful. And he wanted to talk to his mother, and so I called, and I let him talk to the answering machine because I wanted her to hear how he was struggling. And we called her many times. And at the funeral, she said that her husband wouldn't let her answer the phone. I've talked to many that weren't coming, and they don't know what they missed, because giving birth to a child is one thing, but being with them when they die, it's like birth in reverse. And it's a very holy place to be, and they missed a huge, huge opportunity to be with them while they died. they missed a huge blessing. Not a single preacher anywhere, not a single denomination, not a single, ministry student. I couldn't get anyone, mainly because they were gay. Nobody else was helping them. They couldn't go to the doctor. They were skeletons. They were so sick, and how could I turn my back on them? I was in church every Sunday, and the preacher, go out and do nice things and take care of the sick and the needy and the poor, and that's what they preach in church all the time. And I thought, well, I can do that. Then the churches are the ones that slammed and locked the doors on them. Where were they going to go? What were they going to do? And I had no idea. I thought Jimmy, the first one, was the only one I would ever bury. I had no idea. And they just kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. This is for all the brave men who suffered and died a lonely, horrible, terrible death. Many who are buried here and many who aren't buried here. How could I not? How could I not?